There will be no negotiations. The Kremlin has torn up all plans for peace. Trump is going all in. A shocking statement from Washington and Moscow. Meanwhile, Putin personally arrived in Kursk. Did the Russians really take Sudzha? The West is sounding the alarm. Ukraine is supposedly out of option. Attacks, but the armed forces of Ukraine are burning the enemy, even without them. Unexpectedly, from Warsaw, President Duda called on the United States. You will be surprised when you hear. All of this will be covered later in our broadcast. Hotspot, the ceasefire is off. The Kremlin has spat on peace talks. Trump's representative personally arrived in Moscow to persuade Putin for a ceasefire, but it was all in vain. And at the same time, Lukashenko unexpectedly appeared in the capital of Russia. Who was waiting for him there besides Putin? A mystery. At the same time, more and more rumors are emerging about a secret meeting between Putin and Trump in April or May. Perhaps that's when it will be decided, the fate of the entire war. All the details in our story.
Trump's special envoy is already in Moscow. Vitkov has arrived to discuss a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine with Putin.
He will now take the agreed position on the temporary ceasefire between the Russian Federation and Ukraine to the negotiations. Here we need to take into account Vitkov's position on Putin, or those negotiators with whom he will be communicating. Well, then take this position and actually bring it to Washington.
Meanwhile, Putin's assistant, someone named Yuri Ushakov, has already rejected the idea of a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine.
That's what it is. It's nothing more than a temporary breather for the Ukrainian military. Nothing else.
Following Trump's special envoy, the self-proclaimed president of Belarus also arrived. He probably wanted to personally invite everyone over to his place.
Let's sit here calmly, without noise or shouting, and come to an agreement. So tell Trump I'm waiting for him here, along with Putin and Zelensky. We'll sit down and calmly come to an agreement.
But no, he arrived for a personal meeting with Putin.
Today we are building relationships in such a way that they could, an example for relations between many other countries.
It's not surprising to hear that. But, returning to the idea of a ceasefire, Western media believe that this agreement would mean a loss for Putin. But it's also not beneficial for him to reject Trump's proposal.
The Russians are likely going to drag out this process, negotiation. Why? Because for them, the question of the Kursk region is paramount. Believe me, Putin didn't show up in military uniform for no reason.
Reuters reports that Russia has already provided the US with a list of its demands for ending the war. Nothing new. Ukraine's refusal to join NATO, no peacekeepers, and the inclusion of Crimea and 4 regions as part of Russia. But can anything change?
When the parties come out with maximum demands, maximum wants, and if Rubio himself and Trump keep saying that the parties need to constructively, in some way, budge on their demands, it's absolutely clear that they are creating this leeway where they can move. So the answer is obvious. Of course, the Russians will adjust their demands. Let's put it this way, to the realities.
At the same time, back in February, a Moscow analytical center closely linked to the FSB of Russia prepared a document with maximum demands stating that the war cannot end any sooner. Of the year 26, as well as about the dismantling of the Kyiv regime.
Many people can write a lot out of things. One way or another, we understand perfectly well that the Russian Federation has already seriously mastered the media component of propaganda and disinformation around the world.
Is it true that the meeting between Putin and Trump will take place in just a month? Anonymous Russian officials say that there are several scenarios. The first is a meeting around Easter. The second is in May, June, but no later.
The American side understands that to implement Trump's peacekeeping missions, it would be preferable to be before the beginning of summer. Why before the beginning of summer? Everything is much more banal than we can probably imagine. Because summer is the start of vacation season.
But there must be some reason for such a meeting, right?
There needs to be a reason for an atomic meeting. So, the parties should already have an agreed document about ending not just a temporary ceasefire like the one we have now for 30 days, but about the complete end of the hot phase of the war. Then yes, it makes sense for Putin and Trump to meet, because Putin and Trump are to meet, because if something is not agreed upon from Trump's perspective, it's essentially a major screw-up.
Right now, the bunker guy has arrived in Kursk. Fighting is still ongoing in the Kursk region, and the Ukrainian military has likely had to retreat. Why did this happen, and what could it mean for future negotiations? Meanwhile, the West is reporting that Ukraine has run out of attacks, but even without them, the area is still burning. 80 drones attacked military facilities in Bryansk, Rostov, and Belgorod. The loudest strike on the drone factory in the Kaluga region. All the details are in the report.
Russians are trying to bring the fighting from Kursk onto Ukrainian territory. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky.
The enemy is deploying assault units from the airborne troops and special operations forces, aiming to break through our defenses, push Ukrainian units out of the Kursk region, and move the fighting into the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. In trying to achieve political goals at all costs, the enemy has already suffered and continues to suffer significant losses in the Kursk region.
The Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council notes that the occupiers are acting the same way on both Ukrainian and Russian territory. The Russian army has almost completely destroyed Sudzha and Kursk. In the city, it's hard to find a surviving building.
At the moment, there is data from objective control regarding the presence of Russian troops, so-called at the edge and in the center of Sudzha, around the administrative buildings, and accordingly the area of the infamous Piatirochka store. The Ukrainian Defense Forces maintain their presence. Well, not only in Sudzha, but also accordingly in the settlements near Sudzha, which are satellite towns. Sudzha is a district center, and that's why such attention from the Russian troops was focused specifically on the issue of capturing the settlement.
No sooner had Russian troops entered Sudzha than they began to trumpet victory. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin himself flew there. By the way, for the first time during the entire Kursk operation. Indeed, our task in the near future, in the shortest possible time, is to completely defeat the enemy.
Dug in on the territory of Kursk region and continuing combat operations here.
Analysts believe that Putin didn't just put on a military uniform and visit the military command post in the Kursk region for no reason.
It should be noted that approximately 250 square kilometers of Russian territory are currently under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Russia is not trying to organize an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian group being concentrated in the Kursk region. The main efforts are focused on paralyzing Ukrainian logistics.
The Kremlin is likely trying to portray itself as a strong and effective military leader ahead of the meetings between the US and Russian delegations.
After the meeting of the Ukrainian delegation with the delegations from the United States and Saudi Arabia, there were clear statements from the American side and President Trump himself that the nature of military technical assistance to Ukraine is being renewed, and the exchange of intelligence data in full. The Russian Federation has sent a clear signal that if they do not sit down at the negotiating table, I will quote Trump, I will give Ukraine so much weaponry that it will force them to do so. The Russian Federation.
The United Russian-Korean Army has been trying to liberate Kursk for over 6 months. Ukrainian defenders are striking strategically and effectively at key targets in Russia. On the evening of March 12th, the governors of the Rostov and Voronezh regions reported drone attacks and fires at infrastructure facilities. According to local residents, drones attacked the gas infrastructure of the region. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that on the night of March 12th to 13th, their country was attacked by 77 drones across 6 regions. Rosavietsia announced that restrictions have been imposed on the arrival and departure of aircraft at the airports of Saratov and Volgograd.
So in fact, Ukraine, on the contrary, has an additional capability at the moment of striking the territory of the Russian Federation, exclusively using its own means to achieve the actual neutralization of the country's fuel and energy infrastructure. Akmar.
According to the Associated Press, Ukraine has run out of long-range ATACMS missiles that were striking military targets in Russia. The last strikes with these missiles were recorded back in January. However, it's unclear whether this had any impact on the situation.
There are no analogues to Putin's technology in Hlan. The armed forces of Ukraine rolled over the Russians, eliminating their infantry and equipment. What were the Ukrainian defenders able to hit? Shocking statements from Warsaw. Duda called on the US to place nuclear weapons in Poland. Can Washington go for this? And what does this threaten for Russia? Details in the story.
Ukrainian warriors repelled the most Russian attacks in the Pokrovsk direction, reports the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. There, the occupying forces unsuccessfully tried to break through the Ukrainian defense 32 times. Another 11 assaults were carried out by the Russians in the Toretsk direction, and 9 in Kursk. Military experts note a connection between the situation in the Pokrovsk and Toretsk directions, as well as in Kursk.
The enemy clearly lacks operational reserves in the Pokrovsk and Toretsk directions. Look, there's a comb. At the front line is now being shaped not so much by Russian attackers in action, but by the counterattacks of our forces. This indicates that the Russians do not have enough reserves. Where can they get these reserves? So where are these reserves now? Where? They are advancing in Kursk. Tanom, 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 tanom. The situation in the Pokrovsk direction will be determined by how events unfold here, because the Pokrovsk direction remains key for the entire operation in the Greater Donbass.
Ukrainian warriors note that in the Toretsk section of the front, the enemy is suffering losses in personnel and equipment, not only on the ground but also in the sky. Drones operators from the National Police LIT have arranged a real downpour for the occupiers' Mavics. The warriors emphasize that it takes just a month to become a real ace.
This is from our practice. A person flew in combat for a month, and after a month he had exactly his 100th flight. He counted his flights. And indeed, we can already say as an example that a person can easily learn to fly in just a month. Under the wrap, taking off and landing without satellites. So nothing is impossible.
The occupying army attempted to advance on the positions of Ukrainian defenders in the Kharkiv direction 3 times. The warriors repelled attacks in the area of Volchansk and Doroshevka. The defenders note that they are steadfastly holding the line and destroying the enemy not only...
He is with us because he is participating in this Volchansk direction, where we are now. Drones. Very often we also make adjustments for aviation. So, our helicopters are operating. Our fighters are in action. And since technology is being used everywhere now, everyone is asking for video confirmation streams. I believe this is right, because if there is still confirmation, the guys always perform at an excellent level.
And now, all technologies are being used, they are asking for streams. The artillerymen of the 44th Separate Brigade also demonstrated excellent work. They have several Russian howitzers, an ammunition depot, and even a launch point for the enemy's drones to their credit. The scouts of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine boasted about the defeat of yet another juicy target. They managed to destroy a radar station which is part of the Buk M2 missile defense system. It's clear that the equipment tried to escape after being hit, but it didn't get far. The cost of such a radar station is about $40 million. Ukrainian soldiers are also steadfastly holding positions in the Orekov, Liman, Huliaipole, Novopavlivka, Siversk, Kupiansk, and Kramatorsk directions.
In the Lyman direction, Russian invaders attacked in the areas of Novomikhailivka, Mirn, and Novolyubivka. We have not allowed any losses of our positions. In the Siversk direction, the enemy conducted offensive actions in the areas of Bilohorivka, Siversk, and Verkhnokamianska. All enemy attacks were successfully repelled by Ukrainian defenders.
With his proposal to place U.S. nuclear weapons on Polish territory, Andrzej Duda hopes to revive the nuclear sharing project that the Polish president presented to the administration of then U.S. President Joe Biden back in 2022, according to the Financial Times. Poland noted that only Donald Trump decides where to place American nuclear weapons. However, he reminded that in 2023, the Kremlin dictator, contrary to any international obligations, moved tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus.
NATO's borders moved east in 1999. So, after 26 years, NATO's infrastructure also needs to be moved eastward. It's obvious to me. I think it's not just that the time has come, but also that it would be safer if this weapon were already here. Andrzej Duda, the president of Poland, is quoted by the Financial Times.
The idea of placing nuclear weapons on Polish territory is also supported by Prime Minister Donald Tusk. On March 7th, the head of the Polish government stated that in light of the threat from Russia, Europe could find itself on the brink of war in the coming years. That's why Warsaw is having serious negotiations with Paris regarding the proposal by French President Emmanuel Macron to use his country's nuclear potential to protect European allies. By the way, according to a survey, almost 60% of the French support this idea. Earlier, the president of France stated that today it is becoming increasingly difficult for Europeans to rely on NATO forces.
We have an army that is the most effective in Europe.
After World War II, we have had the potential for nuclear deterrence. This protects us much more strongly than many of our neighbors. Since 1964, they have always played a role in maintaining peace and security in Europe. I decided to open strategic debates about protecting our allies on the European continent using our deterrent forces. The decision will depend on the leaders and commanders of European countries.
German Chancellor candidate Friedrich Merz is open to negotiations on the joint use of nuclear weapons by Great Britain and France. At the same time, he does not rule out the protection of the US as reported by The Guardian, citing the broadcasting campaign DLF. Let's remember that after World War II, the Federal Republic of Germany committed to a non-nuclear defense in several international agreements. However, it participates in NATO's nuclear sharing program.
Joint use of nuclear weapons is a question we need to discuss. We need to be stronger together in the area of nuclear deterrence. We need to talk to both countries, France and the UK, always. And moreover, from the perspective of supplementing the American nuclear arsenal, which we certainly want to see preserved. Friedrich Merz, the candidate for Chancellor of Germany, in an interview with the broadcasting company DLF.
Let's remember earlier President Donald Trump called on countries to give up nuclear weapons. He stated that he has managed to achieve certain successes on this issue with Russia and China. The President of the United States noted that the US and Russia possess the largest amount of nuclear weapons. And China will be able to reach that level within 4 to 5 years. Indeed, while Trump is calling for disarmament, Beijing, Moscow and Tehran are planning to discuss the Iranian nuclear program. The meeting will take place on March 14th in China. Meanwhile, US intelligence warns that Iranian scientists are looking for ways to quickly develop nuclear weapons. In Iran, they reject militarization. We want to talk, we just want to talk, we want to talk.
Regarding nuclear weapons, they say that we will not allow Iran to obtain them. If we wanted to make nuclear weapons, America wouldn't be able to stop us. We don't have nuclear weapons, and we're not trying to get them. That's because we ourselves are not striving for that.
At the beginning of March, Donald Trump stated that he wants to negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran. The situation with Iran...
We have a situation with Iran. Something has to happen very soon. I hope we can reach a peace agreement. There are 2 ways to deal with Iran, through military action or by making a deal. I would prefer to make a deal because I don't want to harm Iran.
Otherwise, Donald Trump stated that the U.S. would have to resort to military methods to deal with Iran. Yulia Granovskaya for the Freedom Channel.
Russian media are already loudly proclaiming the successes of Putin's army, claiming that the occupiers have entered Sudzha. But what is really happening there? According to eyewitness accounts, the Russians are literally wiping the city off the face of the earth along with its residents. What are Putin's troops doing in the Kursk region right now? Terrifying details in the report.
For the last 6 months, part of the Kursk region has been under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. And the Russian army has been trying to push out the Ukrainian military all this time. The Kremlin was shelling its own towns and villages with Grad rockets.
Money for Yakov. Subtitles by Dima Torzak.
In 6 months, these territories have turned into scorched earth. Mariupol, Bakhmut, and now Sudzha and the surrounding villages. Part of the Kursk region has turned into occupied Donbass. This is, for example, the railway station in the city of Sudzha after the Russian artillery shelling. Broken windows, charred roofs. Nearby you can see burned structures and damaged houses. And around, hungry dogs are running, left without owners. With massive strikes, the Russian army destroyed not only buildings, but also killed the local population. The surviving civilians of conscription age are immediately sent by the Russian soldiers to assault units.
You 2 are conscripts, right? What's your last name? Mothers, yes. And Dad? You? We're definitely going to get you out with a contract in the 1st Assault Battalion, right?
These destructions are a direct result of the actions of the Russian military. The special military operation is going according to plan. The Russians are effectively recording the damage they inflict on their own territory on camera. Here's a post from one of the Bindi ZVN cows about the entry of the Russian army into Sudzha.
The paratroopers, the 11th Brigade and the Special Forces, one of the 2nd Brigade, are raising flags in the center of Sudzha. The city was under occupation for 215 days.
The video drone shows that the city is completely destroyed. When the USSR entered Sudzha more than 6 months ago, there were no destructions. And now the Ukrainian forces are leaving the town, as there is practically not a stone left standing.
Well, all the areas that gradually came under the control of the Russian troops saw that they were taken, almost without a fight. The same goes for Sudzha. Yesterday, there were video recordings geolocated showing Russian troops on the eastern outskirts of the city. Today, we see again on the opposite screen the Russian troops, and once again, there are no footage of battles. So for us, this once again, as we stated a few days ago, indicates a systematic retreat of the Ukrainian forces.
Sudzha is just one of dozens of examples of how Russian cities reflect what the Russian army brings with it. After the liberation of Sudzha from the armed forces of Ukraine, journalists from federal channels arrived there immediately, blaming the Ukrainian military for everything.
Another store looted by the militants. As soon as they entered the city, they immediately started clearing the shelves, sweeping away, making mocking videos here. They were sitting behind the cash register.
In the 4th year of the so-called special military operation, the Russian army has found itself in a situation where it is forced to carry out airstrikes on cities within its own territory. The townspeople who remained in Sudzha were not evacuated, which caused a wave of indignation and criticism towards the Russian authorities. Now, as these territories are once again coming under the control of the Kremlin, it's impossible to live there, as the Russian army has leveled everything to the ground, showing no mercy to either their own or others.
Who is behind the scenes of Russian politics, planting insane ideas in the mind of the Russian dictator? The shocking truth about Kremlin's grey eminences. After all, it's unlikely that Putin could come up with this nonsense on his own. So who is shaping the strategy and pushing Russia into the abyss of chaos? Who can influence the dictator today? Details in the story.
Who is behind the scenes of Russian politics, planting insane ideas in the mind of the Russian dictator?
There are no officials in my immediate circle, and I hope it never will be. They are all colleagues, but, I don't get close to anyone, and I don't plan to get close.
Hidden behind the official figures and loud statements are those who shape Russia's strategy and direction. Their names are rarely heard in public, but their influence is felt everywhere.
There's a saying, it is the entourage that makes the king. The people surrounding the supreme ruler shape his ideology and influence the decisions he makes. They serve almost like a shadow government and have a huge influence.
The decisive role in the attack on Ukraine. In 2022, there were paranoid friends of the president of Russia, among whom was Nikolai Patrushev, the head of the Security Council and Putin's colleague from the KGB since 1975.
Starting from the 90s, Patrushev will follow in Putin's footsteps. In 98, he will replace him as the head of the main control directorate of the president. And just a year later, he will take the position of the director of the FSB.
Putin's colonel knew the post.
I just had a meeting with the colonel.
Nikolai Patrushev, a true confidant of Putin, a friend since their time working together in the Leningrad KGB, has obsessive thoughts about a Western attack.
As for the conflict in Ukraine and what's happening there, the belief among everyone, and everyone knows this, is that it wasn't the people of Ukraine who organized it. The people of Ukraine are against this. They are being intimidated, forced to go down this path. The US organized it, just like the conflict in 2008 with Georgia.
Patrushev has always been known for his talkativeness and his noticeable authority in explaining the official policies of the Kremlin, which once again confirms the trust Putin has placed in him.
But now Patrushev has essentially been sent into retirement. In May 2024, Putin made him his assistant for shipbuilding. The position is clearly smaller than the previous ones, but there's no need to worry about the fate of Nikolai Platonovich.
A true patriot of the Putin clan and KGB traditions, Alexei Dyumin. Previously, he was the former head of the Tula region, and now he is truly a close ally of Putin.
Even now, many still see Dumin as a potential successor to Putin. He is absolutely devoted to his boss, carrying out his most delicate assignments, and was even ready to sacrifice himself for his patron.
He stood next to Putin at the beginning of his presidency, being the one who ensured the security of the head of state. Today, Dumin is one of the key assistants to the president, overseeing the defense industry. He is the one referred to as the person who played an important role in the annexation of Crimea.
Putin gave him a position closer to himself by appointing him as president, the president's assistant. Now Dyumin oversees issues related to the defense industry and sports, and he also holds the position of Secretary of the Security Council. Not long ago, he was also included in the Security Council.
He doesn't seek publicity, but it is his decisions that impact the security and defense capability of Russia. He is not just an executor, he is a strategist, a person behind many of Russia's defense initiatives.
Dyumin unconditionally follows everything Putin says and enjoys his great trust. And in his role as the president's assistant, he addresses many important issues.
In May 2024, State Duma Deputy Elena Yampolskaya was appointed as the president's advisor on cultural issues. Previously, she headed the Culture Committee in the State Duma and is known for her initiatives to protect the Russian language and traditional values. Elena Yampolskaya. Once, she was just a simple journalist and theater critic. She wrote books and headed the newspaper Culture. And in 2018, she headed the State Duma Committee on Culture.
By this time, Yampolskaya had already managed to make her mark with her controversial views and statements.
As the chair of the State Duma Committee on Culture, Yampolskaya actively supports Russia's aggression against Ukraine, justifying the actions of the army by referencing the protection of cultural values and historical heritage.
Yampolskaya became the president's advisor last year. Now she is putting her nonsense into Putin's head. And on the side, she writes denunciations and puts forward new repressive initiatives.
You won't see her on the front lines, but it is her statements and initiatives that shape the cultural justification for military aggression. For such activity, Yampolskaya ended up on the sanctions lists of the USA, the UK, and the EU.
That's all for now. For more fiery news from the front, stay tuned for the next episode.